Hello everyone and welcome to the Charlotte Gus Podcast. I'm Charlotte and this is Gus. Okay. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It has been well over 3 years since the last episode. I think I explained that I might be stopping the podcast in the last episode that went out. The reason why I stopped was I started working full-time, which means that I didn't have much time anymore to film because before that I was still a student. Another reason why I stopped is I didn't really want to be public on social media because my work involved working with clients and representing my company in front of those clients, and so I didn't want for my hobbies to just pop up on any Google search that they might have on me. And the third reason was I moved to a flat which is very dark, and so even on very bright days the lighting was terrible. Today it's a very overcast day in Paris, and I don't even have to have the ISO very high for it to have that much brightness. I have huge windows, it is much nicer. I've since quit my job and so might have a lot more time to allocate to a YouTube knitting podcast. I also have had more time recently to knit, which means that there's a good chance that I might pick this up where I left off and start the podcast again. Now, I don't knit quite as much as I used to, so I might throw in a few other different crafts in there. Do tell me if you're interested in seeing what other things I do. Recently I've done a bit of painting. I've also done a bit of drawing and illustration on digital illustration. So if that's something that's interesting, do let me know. I initially wanted to show you a few projects that were finished during the last 3 years when I wasn't running the podcast. I filmed a bit of it, and then well over halfway through I realised that the camera was working but I had disabled the sound recording. So I have images, I don't have any sound. Might do some voiceover, or I might just keep it for maybe future episodes if I haven't made much progress on my work in progress. I can feature one of the projects that I had worked on before. So today I wanted to show you my latest FO because it was finished a while ago, but it's a new pattern that I've just recently published, so it's still relevant to today, and then show you a few of the different works in progress whips that I'm working on. Also, please excuse me if I sound weird because it's been quite a while and this is not something that comes naturally to me, and when I say this I mean talk to myself in front of a camera. If I'm distracted, it's because I have cats doing stuff in the background. Finally, I think the sound is going to be terrible. I'm going to try and have noise reduction. Alright, let's start. So, FOs first. I wanted to present to you in video my latest FO, which is also a pattern that I've published, and it is the Artica shawl. So it is a crescent shaped shawl. It uses 3 skeins of fingering weight yarn, one in colour A, which is this green that is used for the lace section, and also the primary colour of the brioche, and then 2 skeins of the colour B or colour 2, which is this pink, which is used for the garter and the lace applied border. This is a shawl that I designed throughout the year of 2020. I think I cast on in March or April, right at the start of COVID. Things you might be interested in knowing about the design. First of all, the shawl. It has 3 sections. So I mentioned it's a crescent shawl, but it has 3 sections, and the first one is a half circle of lace that has rounded edges and sort of makes like a flower. So that's the first section. Then there is a brioche section that takes that flower and turns it into a star by making chevrons. That's the second section, and then the third section is garter stitch with short rows, German short rows, and it sort of brings that star into a crescent, and then it has a very narrow applied border in lace, and you can see it is very narrow. There's nothing too complicated about it. I think the lace, you can sort of get into rhythm about it. I mean, you'll have to check just exactly how many stitches you're decreasing or how many yarn overs you're doing, but basically it's always going to be the same logic. And then there are bubbles. I don't know if you can really tell, but in the lace there are bubbles. Let me find you one. That's one. Yeah. Then the brioche has some pretty intense decreases and increases. Mostly the decreases are hard because you're decreasing, 4 stitches at a time or even more than that. But, I have video tutorials for each and every one of the brioche stitches used in the shawl. So if you're new to them, you can just have a look at the videos and I will walk you through it. And then the short rows, well, they're not very complicated. It just means that you have to be very thorough in following the pattern, not to get lost. But other than that, I mean, it's garter stitch, so it's pretty straightforward. Of course, I always say that from the standpoint of I designed it, so it was always very clear in my head what's going to happen in each section, are not the designer. So even though some parts of it might be a bit involved for you, rest assured that it should be error-free. Of course, you can never be too sure, but at least it should provide a good knitting experience. I think I can say a few words about why it's called Artica. If you read the pattern and if you read my post on Instagram, I will tell you that it is inspired by the ice cap sort of expansion and then shrinking, and then the ripples that it has in the ocean. I think that's the inspiration behind the shape. It just coincides that it is called Artica, but the fact of the matter is I had the lace already existing, almost finished, because I'd used it in a yoke jumper which had not turned out well because the math was a bit off, and so I increased too much and it was rippling in weird angles, and so it wasn't really suitable. The lace I designed was not really suitable for a jumper, but I thought I really like it, I've invested this work in it, I can use this, modify it a bit and turn it into a shawl, which I did. And then from there I thought, what is the theme that I want to go with for the rest of the shawl? I actually was inspired by the name first. I was working on a project and it was getting very long at work, and so one of the names of the sub-projects, I played with it a bit and it turned into Artica, which was so close to the Arctic, that I thought, well, there's this theme there. I mean, the word sort of morphs into Artica quite easily, and then from there I have a source of inspiration and I have this lace, and let me see how I can work around both the name that existed from the very beginning and the lace that existed from even before the project started. And from there I created the shape, going from the lace all the way to the border, and I didn't have a set plan. The border I thought of added at the very last minute after I'd done all of the garter. I thought, I think it would look best if there was something else on top of it, and so I decided to add that lace, but I didn't want it to be too much. I didn't have much yarn, and so I came up with this very narrow lace, which I think I'll use again in the future because I think it looks very, very nice. And so that's how I worked this shawl, and I finished it in August, so it took me 5 months to go from the initial sketch and cast on to the finished product, and then a few more months to finish writing the pattern, have it tested, have it edited. But during 2020 it was really one of the very positive things that kept me going, because it was something that let me be creative. But it's not really that it let me be creative, it's that it showed me that I still had some creativity left in me, which for a good while during the first lockdown and a few months afterwards, I completely stopped sewing, which was the way I was being most creative before COVID happened. And because we weren't going to work anymore, we weren't going any place really, I didn't have any reason to wear clothes. And just because I had nowhere to wear new clothes that I'd made, I didn't really have a reason to sew. So I sewed a few dozen face masks, but that wasn't creative. I wasn't really happy about it. And I was exploring new things. I made bread, like a bunch of people. I started doing some cross stitch as well, but I wasn't knitting and I wasn't sewing. And then there were a few phases where this shawl was keeping me going, and I was designing things again, and I was being creative, and that felt really, really good. And there were a few moments as well when I sketched the idea, but going from a flower shape to a star shape to a crescent, it was a lot of challenge design-wise, because it's not something that's sort of straightforward. You know, there are many shawls that are just this triangle, and it's just a question of finding a stitch pattern that you like and then making it fit into a basically big stripe with an angle at the side. It takes some designing, it takes some problem solving, but it's not a huge challenge. This I feel was very challenging, and it kept me very engaged in it. And so I really enjoyed designing it. I think the result is stunning. I am 100% biased, but it is really one of the favourite things I've ever made, and I really like it. I didn't mention the yarn that I use. I know a big part of making podcasts is presenting yarns that you've used, and I don't want this to be an infomercial, but this was not in any way sponsored. Both yarns I purchased at Edinburgh Yarn Festival in 2017. I have such good memories of my trip to Edinburgh. I loved it. The green yarn is Matte Tosh Merino Light in Jasper, and the pink is Merino and Silk Blend by La Bien-Aimée. I don't think they carry the base anymore. And the colourway is Very Po, and I think they don't have that colourway either. So there you go. You can't buy these yarns, so I don't have that much of a problem speaking about it. It will work with any fingering weight yarn you want. My testers, I've used 4-ply yarn. Both of these are singles, so I know it works with 4-plies. You get better stitch definition for the lace. So if I were to make this again, or if I were to advise you on a yarn, I'd probably have the colour A in a 4-ply worsted ply yarn, just because you'd probably get better stitch definition on the lace, and it makes a huge difference. If you go on the project page and if you go on the pattern page and if you look at the projects, you will see that Musical Poem has made a version. Her name is Amanda, and she was one of my testers, and she made a version using 4-ply yarn, and you will see that her lace looks 100% better than mine, at least. So here are my 2 cents about yarn choice. Feel like I've been speeding through this? It's because I see the low battery light flashing on the viewfinder. So that's it for finished projects. I haven't finished many things recently, but I'm working on a couple of things. One of them is I've started working in double knitting. It's a technique that was introduced to me by Sockmatician, Nathan Taylor. He, I think, is an expert in the matter, and I'd seen it, well, when I was doing this podcast regularly, and it seemed very intriguing, as in very challenging and creative, and I'd seen it used in the fashion industry, in high street fashion. I was interested in the concept, and so I some reason I thought I would give it a go recently because I needed a project that would fit in a project bag that I could have on the go. So it'd probably be, you know, socks or mittens, and I figured double knitting is double the warmth, so it would be great for knitting mittens. And so I started this project, which is also a design of mine, and it is basically a very simple mitten with a nice and very simple cuff detail, and then just some bubble design on the top of the mitten. And you can see I've made it past the thumb. I'm just going to try it on for you, and it's going very well. I think you can see there are a couple of issues with it. You can see around the cuff how the fabric is not very smooth and regular, and that's because I was changing out my dominant strand. So if you want to have a very even fabric, you don't want to change which yarn goes to the front and which yarn goes to the back. A bit with same with colour work, you always want to keep the same yarn dominance. I didn't know that. I found out, and now I do. And the other problem you can see is I did change, but not, you know, every other stitch. I did change a few times during the hand portion, and the way you can tell is that I have two slightly different colours of yarns, which it's not going to show on the camera because I am so overexposed, but there is a bit of striping happening. I'm really not sure if you can see. Maybe on Instagram I've posted a few pictures, or I will post a few pictures in the future, and you will be able to tell. Basically, one of the balls of yarns is a bit more pink and the other one is a bit more yellowish. So the yarn that I'm using is some cheap but very warm Drops alpaca. It's 100% alpaca yarn. I think Drops yarn is probably not very ethical just because you can't be that cheap and ethical. It's still better for the environment and for animals to use yarn that already exists than new yarn. And so I have this in my stash. I'm using it. I would probably not buy Drops yarn again, but when I was a student, this was a very affordable option, and I am glad that it exists. Now that I have more purchasing power and that I'm also better informed, I know that, you know, something that is cheap, it's probably not going to fit my values. And look who's joining us. Do you want to be in a podcast? Yeah. You can stay here. So I'm making slow progress. I think I started this in January, early January. And this is, you know, this is the first one. I haven't even started on the second one. But I'm getting a bit faster at it, and I think I'll just continue working on them and finish them, you know, for next winter, basically. I'm also writing the pattern as I go, so at some point this will be available, but when I say at some point, I mean next year, really. Not getting anyone's hopes up. I know how slow I am at getting patterns out. That's it for knitting? No, that's not it. I have another project that I'll probably show you in the next episode, if there is a next episode, because I don't know where it is at the moment. What I've been working on recently though is crochet. I shared on Instagram that I've been working on my granny stripe blanket, which I started in 2016, and I've just been obsessed with it recently. It comes and goes really. I think it's the same for everyone, but yeah, I really enjoy it. This is it. It's getting, you know, decent sized. I can have it on my lap when I work on it, and it actually is big enough to keep me warm, because I'm sitting cross-legged when I work on it, and so I can just have it on my lap and it covers my thighs and keeps me warm. I love this project because I'm knitting it using mostly leftovers from projects that were made between 2016 or 2015 even and now, and so it's a lot of, it really is a memory blanket as well as a granny stripe I think I've been really good at having, keeping my projects in a color scheme that works well, because it just looks good. I'm really happy about it, and everything's in sorts of pinks and greys and purples and mauves and beiges. Is that plural? Beiges? Anyways, some yarns I dyed myself, like those two silks and merino. I wanted to make a mystery knit along with it, and I didn't like the pattern, so stopped it. This is from Woolenvine, and I used it in my TP shawl. This is Toshmo Light from Madeleine Tosh, and this was in the original sample for the Chances wrap, which, memories. This is from La Bien-Aimée, and it was in the second sample of the Chances wrap. This is Ovis, etc. And it was in my Il Kay Sa Mère mittens, which I never published, never finished writing the pattern, I think. But yeah, I mean, this is La Bien-Aimée, and it was in the Vortex shawl. So, lots of memories in there, and I just love working on this. I don't have enough leftovers to finish the blanket, so at some point I'll have to go through my stash, find yarns that work with it, and if I don't have any, I think I'll continue purchasing yarns that fit the colour palette, because I just want to keep it all in the same colours. But I've also wanted to have another crochet project, because why not? And so I wanted to make a new Hexie blanket. I've finished my Hexie Love actually, but I really loved working on it, and I wanted to have a new project, but I wanted to have it in a slightly different pattern. And so last night I made a few samples of Hexies in crochet, trying to come up with a pattern that I liked. And I thought it would be interesting to show you sort of the evolution of how I designed them. So let me pull them out and try and sort them in the right order. I think I started with this one. Okay, it's going to be super hard. So I think this was the first one. It's got a puff stitch in the middle, and then it's got double crochets, 2 rounds of double crochets to make 2 different circles. I liked it, but thought the puff part or the center part was a bit too small, and overall the Hexie was a bit too small. One of the things I wanted to change from the Hexie Love Naturally was the size of the Hexies. I wanted to have them a bit bigger, so I'd have to do less of them, because joining them is a pain. So I wanted to reduce the amount of joining I would have to do, and for that I haven't done the math, but I'm guessing that if I have a bit less Hexies, yes, the perimeter grows, but overall you'd still be doing less joining. So I think I did this one next, which looks hideous. The puff part is a bit bigger because the center is a bit larger as well, but there aren't enough puffs, and so there's big holes between them. And then I found the rest of it was a bit too holy as well. I wanted to have more fabric. Let me show you with a dark background. I wanted there to have less holes. And so I moved from this to this one, which is a square actually. Again, with a tea bag behind it, you'll probably see better. And so I'm very happy with the center. I've moved from 6 to 8 puff stitches. Which means that I could do a square and couldn't do a Hexie, but I wanted to see how one made a square. I like it. I might keep this one for a square version, because I think it's really nice. It has a lot of holes around it, but it could be a different look. And I think I'd want to test this out in a DK weight yarn, just to see, if it is any different. Of course, I find that the more holes there are in the crochet, the more granny it looks, which I'm not 100% fan of. I went back to the Hexie and I wanted to reduce holes, and so I made this one. So as you can see, it's a lot of double crochets, and you can see the density of fabric, but the center is just, I didn't do any puff stitches in the center, and I feel like this is just ugly, really. But it allowed me to figure out, you know, the ratios and number of stitches for the outer portions, and so it was a good middle step. And then what I decided to do was take the puff part and center sort of flower from this one, the outer hexie from this one, and make this, which is the biggest of all the ones that I've made, and I really like it. It's just the center is a bit rigid and I'm not really sure I like it. And so currently I'm in the process of making a final version, I think, maybe. Currently I'm working on the last iteration, which is a different center with a puff stitch, basically same as the last one, change the center, but like the very inner part to make the perfect hexie. And once I've done that, if it turns out as I expect it to, I will make another version, just one other version in DK weight yarn, make sure that it still works, and if it does, I will have a pattern and I will be able to start thinking of a palette. Write my stash, see what I have. If I don't have enough yarn, I think I still have some DK undyed yarn and dyes, and so I might dye some yarn. Otherwise, I think I'll be looking at cheaper options, so I'll probably go on Ravelry and find some DK weight yarns that's up for grabs. Also, if you have some merino DK weight yarn lying around which you want to get rid of, get in touch. Or if you want to get rid of it for a cheap, you know, amount. And if you're in Europe, because otherwise postage might be super expensive, but I'll be in the market for some DK weight yarn. So that's the last thing that I'm working on at the moment. And I've actually made it before I ran out of battery, which is sort of a miracle. So my battery died. It's now 2 days since I filmed the rest of the video. I think I was done with what I wanted to say. I've just since then created one more crochet square. So this is the new square that I've worked on. If you like this episode of the podcast, if you want it to come back, like this video, let me know in the comments, let me know on Instagram. If you have any comments of things that you would like to see or see me do differently, also I'm all ears. Like I said, I'm probably going to have more time in the future to film the podcast. I may not have a lot of time to spend knitting though, so content it's probably not going to be as interesting as it used to be, and I may have to space out the episodes more. But yeah, if you want to see more episodes, do let me know. Hope you have a very lovely week, and I'll see you soon. Bye!